Orlando, Florida in August is a humid embrace, a constant whisper of sweat on skin, but I'd always found a strange comfort in it. It was the air of home, the scent of blooming jasmine mixing with the distant tang of chlorine from a neighbor's pool. My name is Sophia Walker, and at 28 I thought I had built a life as solid and predictable as the sunrise over Lake Eala. 8 years of marriage to David, 2 beautiful children, Lily, my tiny whirlwind of 3, and baby Leo, barely a year old and still smelling of milk and innocence. Our house, a modest 3-bedroom with a struggling orange tree in the backyard, was a testament to our dreams, painstakingly furnished with second-hand finds and a few carefully chosen new pieces, each with its own story. My days revolved around them. Wake before dawn, a silent cup of coffee as the city stirred, then the joyful chaos of breakfast, diaper changes, and daycare runs. David, my David, would often leave for his construction job before the sun was fully up, his strong arms giving me a quick squeeze, his lips a familiar kiss on my forehead. We were the quintessential young family, building our empire brick by brick, laugh by laugh, or so I believed. We met in college, a whirlwind romance that led to a courthouse wedding at 21. Everyone said we were too young, but we were in love, full of that fierce, unshakable certainty only youth can provide. We beat the odds, or so it seemed. We were supposed to be the success story, the proof that young love could last. My evenings were a familiar ballet of dinner preparations, bath time splashes, and bedtime stories. I cherished those moments the way Lily's small hand felt in mine, Leo's soft head nestled against my shoulder. David would often arrive home, tired but always ready to help, to read a final story or simply hold me on the couch as the house finally quieted. We'd talk about our days, his work challenges, my triumphs with a new recipe or a breakthrough in Lily's potty training. We were a team, a partnership, we were us. And then, like a rogue wave crashing unexpectedly onto a calm shore, everything I knew, everything I trusted was ripped away. It was a Tuesday evening. The kids were finally asleep, the house silent save for the hum of the air conditioning. David had been quiet all through dinner, an unusual silence that I'd put down to a tough day at work. But as he sat beside me on the couch, staring at the muted television screen, I knew it was more. His hands were clasped between his knees, his shoulders hunched. The air in the room thickened, growing heavy with an unspoken dread. I reached for his hand, my fingers intertwining with his, but his grip was loose, almost distant. "David, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice a soft murmur in the quiet room. He took a deep, shuddering breath, then another, as if bracing himself for a blow. His eyes, usually so warm and full of life, were clouded with a pain that mirrored the one about to shatter my own world. "Sophia," he began, his voice rough, barely a whisper. "I have to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs, a cold dread seeped into my bones. I braced myself, not knowing what to expect, but certainly not what came next. "About 4 years ago," he continued, his gaze fixed on some point beyond me, I cheated." The word hung in the air, a physical blow. It wasn't a question or a confession seeking forgiveness, but a statement of fact, brutal and unyielding. My breath hitched, the air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. 4 years ago, that meant it happened when Lily was just a baby, when we were still celebrating our new parenthood, when I was navigating the sleep deprivation and boundless love of a new mother. My mind reeled. "What?" I managed, the single word a mere breath. He finally turned to me, his eyes filled with a desperate plea for understanding, or perhaps just a release from the burden he carried. But all I saw was betrayal painted starkly across his face. Not physically, Sophia, not in person," he hurried to clarify, as if that made it any better. I sexted with 3 different women. Each word was a fresh stab. 3 women, my world once so vibrant was rapidly fading to gray. One was an old high school friend. Another was a coworker, and one was my ex-girlfriend. My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together, but they wouldn't fit. My David, the man who brought me flowers for no reason, who still made me laugh until my sides ached, who was the anchor of my life, this couldn't be him. This wasn't our story. This was a nightmare. Exchanged photos? The question escaped me, raw and disbelieving. He nodded, a silent admission that felt like a scream in my ears. "Yeah, we all did." The details spilled out, each one a fresh wound. He talked about the coworker, how they had met up not at their regular office but at a different location where she sometimes worked. They'd spent hours talking, he said, just talking. But then, as they said goodbye, a hug in his hand, David's hand had strayed, grabbed her ass, he confessed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. My mind conjured the image, vivid and sickening, of my husband's hand on another woman, a casual intimacy that was reserved only for me. The sheer audacity, the disrespect, the absolute shattering of trust. It was a physical ache in my chest, a burning behind my eyes. 4 years. For years he had carried this secret, while I went on, oblivious, living our shared life, planning our future, loving him with every fiber of my being. 4 years of waking up beside a stranger, a man who had been capable of such deceit. The smiles, the tender touches, the declarations of love, were they all lies? Was our entire foundation built on sand, ready to crumble with a single wave of truth? I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt thin, suffocating. My vision blurred, the familiar comfort of our living room twisting into something grotesque and unfamiliar. The silence that followed his confession was deafening, filled only with the frantic beating of my own heart. I wanted to scream, to rage, to throw something, to demand an explanation that could somehow undo the damage. But all I could do was stare at him, a man I thought I knew, now a stranger, the architect of my sudden, profound misery. "Why?" I whispered, the word barely audible. "Why now, after 4 years?" His shoulders sagged, his gaze falling to his clasped hands. "I couldn't live with it anymore, Sophia. It's been eating at me every day, especially with the kids. I couldn't pretend anymore." Pretend, that word echoed, a hollow mockery of our life together. He had been pretending for 4 years, while I was living a truth that didn't exist. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over me: shock, disbelief, anger, pain, and a terrifying, bone-deep fear. Fear for our children, for our future, for the life I had so carefully constructed. I loved him, I truly did. That love was tangled up with our history, our shared dreams, the tiny hands of our children. But could I ever look at him the same way? Could I ever trust him again? The thought of leaving, of unraveling our entire world, felt like trying to escape a black hole, impossible and terrifying. But the thought of staying, of living with this gaping wound, felt equally unbearable. I felt utterly lost, adrift in a sea of betrayal, with no compass and no shore in sight. The world kept spinning, even though mine felt like it had stopped dead. The next few days were a blur, a fog of disbelief and raw, unadulterated pain. David tried to talk, to explain, to apologize, but his words felt hollow, like whispers across a vast, unbridgeable chasm. Every touch, every glance, every familiar gesture from him now felt tainted, a cruel reminder of the secret he had kept hidden, festering beneath the surface of our life. I went through the motions, a robot navigating the routines of motherhood. I made breakfast, packed lunches, sang lullabies, but my mind was a battlefield. Lily's innocent questions about Daddy, Leo's sweet, gummy smiles, they were like tiny daggers, each one reminding me of the perfect family picture that had been shattered. How could I protect them from this? How could I continue to build a life with a man whose foundation I no longer trusted? David suggested counseling. He pleaded, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a desperate remorse that frankly only made me angrier. 4 years of silence, and now he wanted to fix it with a few therapy sessions. The audacity was breathtaking. Still, a part of me, the part that still remembered the girl who fell in love with him, the part that clung to the dreams we had built, felt a flicker of hope. For the kids, for the life we had, maybe, just maybe, it could be salvaged. We went. The counselor was a kind, older woman with gentle eyes and a reassuring voice. She spoke of rebuilding trust, of communication, of forgiveness. David spilled his guts, expressing his regret, his fear of losing us. He said he had been young, foolish, overwhelmed by the new responsibilities of fatherhood, and had sought validation in the wrong places. He claimed it was a moment of weakness, a series of stupid mistakes that he deeply, deeply regretted. He said he loved me, that he had always loved me, and that the guilt had been crushing him. I sat there, listening, a stone in my chest. I nodded in the right places, offered monosyllabic answers when prompted, but inside, a cold, hard resolve was beginning to form. As he spoke, I didn't hear remorse. I heard excuses. I heard a man who was only confessing now because the weight of his secret had become too heavy for him, not because he was truly ready to face the devastation he had caused me. He was trying to ease his conscience, not truly mend my broken heart. The counselor suggested exercises, ways to reconnect. David was eager, almost too eager. He brought me flowers, cooked dinner, offered to take the kids out so I could have some quiet time. But every gesture, every attempt to bridge the gap felt like a performance. I saw the glint in his eye, the subtle way he watched me for a reaction, hoping for a sign of softening. It solidified my growing suspicion. This wasn't about fixing us, it was about him not losing his comfortable life, his family, his reputation. The coworker detail gnawed at me. She worked at another job, David had said, a different location. Why there? And the hand on her ass, the casual intimacy. That felt more real, more tangible than the abstract concept of sexting. Sexting felt distant, virtual. The physical touch, however brief, felt like a violation of my body, our marriage bed, everything we shared. I started to pay closer attention to David, really see him for the first time in years. The way his eyes darted when I mentioned something related to work, the slight hesitation before answering a simple question. Small things, imperceptible before, now screamed deceit. The trust wasn't just broken, it was shattered into a million irreparable pieces. And in its place, something new began to grow, something sharp and cold. One evening, after another fruitless counseling session, David tried to initiate intimacy. He reached for me, his hand tracing my arm. I flinched. The memory of his confession, of his hand on another woman's body, flashed through my mind like a strobe light. I recoiled, pulling away as if burned. His face fell, a mask of hurt, but I saw through it. It was a hurt born of rejection, not of understanding my pain. "I can't," I whispered, turning away. The bed felt vast and empty, even with him beside me. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the humid Orlando night pressing in. I thought about those 4 years, the years I had spent loving him, supporting him, building our family, while he was secretly sharing himself, his body, his intimate thoughts with others. The rage, simmering beneath the surface, began to boil. The idea of forgiveness, of making it work, began to feel like a betrayal of myself. How could I ever truly be happy knowing this? How could I ever trust him to hold my hand, to kiss me, to share our bed without the phantom presence of those three other women, their images, their words, their shared secrets? I started small. During the day, while the kids were at daycare, I found myself drawn to David's phone. He had always been so open with it, leaving it on the counter, using it for music or games with Lily. Now it felt like a locked vault. He started keeping it closer, taking it to the bathroom, always face down. Another tell, my fingers trembled as I picked it up one afternoon. He was at work. I knew his passcode, our anniversary. It felt like a violation, but I justified it. He had already violated me far worse. I scrolled through his messages, his emails, nothing. He was too smart for that, too careful. He had clearly wiped the slate clean years ago. My stomach churned with disappointment, but also with a strange sense of vindication. He was hiding something, but then an idea sparked. Not his phone, but his work computer. He sometimes worked from home, leaving it logged in. It was a long shot, but I was desperate for anything, any concrete proof beyond his confession, any detail that could help me piece together the full extent of his betrayal. I needed to see it to understand it, not just hear his carefully curated version. The next day, David left for work early. The house was quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached his home office, a space I rarely entered. His laptop was on the desk, closed. I opened it, the screen flickering to life. It was locked. My anniversary passcode didn't work here. Of course not, work security. A wave of frustration washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a cold determination. There had to be another way. I remembered him complaining once about a new security protocol, something about a separate password for his work applications. He'd written it down, he said, because it was too complicated to remember. Where would he put it? I started searching. His desk, neatly organized, but I knew David. He was a creature of habit and also a bit messy when it came to truly important things. Not in a drawer, not in a folder. My eyes fell on a small, leather-bound notebook, almost hidden beneath a stack of old bills. It was his work journal where he jotted down notes, ideas, contact numbers. My fingers trembled as I opened it, and there it was, scrawled on the inside cover in his familiar handwriting, a string of seemingly random letters and numbers, his work password. My breath caught in my throat. This felt like a turning point, a step over a line I never thought I'd cross. But the anger, the feeling of being deceived, was a powerful motivator. I typed the password into the login screen, the computer word, and then a new world opened up. His work emails, his company's internal messaging system. My hands shook, but my resolve hardened. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I knew I would recognize it when I saw it. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. This was about understanding the enemy. This was about finding the truth, no matter how ugly. And as I started to scroll, a chilling realization settled over me. I was no longer just a wife trying to heal. I was a detective, and David was my suspect. The cursor blinked on David's work laptop, a silent invitation into the darkest corners of his deception. My hands trembled, but a strange, cold calm had settled over me. This wasn't about understanding anymore, it was about knowing. Every fiber of my being screamed that I shouldn't be doing this, that I was violating a trust, but what trust was left? He had already obliterated it, leaving me with nothing but shattered pieces. I started with his email, searching for names, the high school friend, the coworker, the ex-girlfriend. It felt like I was rummaging through a stranger's life, and in a way I was. The man whose emails I was dissecting wasn't the David I had married, the one who shared his hopes and dreams over late-night coffee. This was a ghost, a shadow. My heart hammered as I typed the high school friend's name into the search bar. Sarah. A few old emails popped up, mostly innocent at first, old group project discussions from college, a brief exchange about a mutual friend's wedding. But then, buried within a chain of seemingly innocuous messages, I found it. A subject line that read, "Thinking about old times." The winking emoticon was a punch to the gut. I clicked, my breath catching. The exchange was 4 years old, just as David had confessed. It started light, nostalgic, but quickly veered into flirtation. Photos were mentioned, suggestive banter followed, escalating in intimacy with each reply. My stomach churned. He hadn't just sexted, he had actively pursued, engaged, and enjoyed these illicit exchanges. The messages painted a picture of a man relishing the attention, feeding off the thrill of a forbidden connection, all while I was at home, caring for our newborn Lily, dreaming of our future. The images themselves weren't there, he was too smart for that, likely deleting them from his email or using a different platform. But the words, the blatant longing, the shared secrets were enough. I read through the entire exchange, each line twisting the knife deeper. He had called her beautiful, said he missed her touch, lamented being stuck in a routine. Stuck, that word echoed in my mind, a venomous whisper. Was that how he saw our life, our family, me? As a routine he was trapped in. The Sarah thread finally ended with a vague promise to catch up properly soon, a casual implication of a future transgression that sent a shiver down my spine. I closed the email, my hands shaking, and moved on. Next, his ex-girlfriend, Jessica. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a desperate need for all the ugly truth driving me forward. Jessica had always been a sore spot, a ghost from his past that I thought had been properly laid to rest. Now she was resurrected as a specter of betrayal. The emails with Jessica were more sporadic, less frequent than with Sarah, but infinitely more emotionally charged. They spoke of what-ifs and missed chances. He reminisced about their younger days, about a passion he claimed he hadn't felt since. This cut deeper than the others. Sarah was a thrill, a fleeting moment of ego stroking. Jessica was a deeper wound, a reopening of old feelings, a challenge to the very foundation of our love story. He had told her she was the one who got away, that he often thought about her. This wasn't just physical or superficial, it was an emotional infidelity that struck at the core of my identity as his wife. He had told me I was his one, his only, all lies. The worst part was a series of messages discussing our marriage. He described me as distant and preoccupied after Lily's birth, implying that my focus on our child was somehow a failing on my part, an excuse for his own wandering eye. The audacity, the self-pitying justification made my blood run cold. I remembered those early days of motherhood, the exhaustion, the overwhelming love, the constant demands. And while I was navigating that, he was painting me as the villain in his narrative, seeking comfort and validation from an old flame. The thought made me sick. He made himself out to be the victim, neglected and misunderstood, conveniently omitting his own role in creating any distance. I found a few photos attached to an email from Jessica, not explicit, but pictures of her posing suggestively, which David had clearly saved. My stomach lurched. He had kept them for 4 years. But the coworker Emily was the one who truly consumed me. David's confession about grabbing her ass, the physical violation, had etched itself into my mind. I searched her name, expecting casual work-related messages. What I found was a rabbit hole of deceit. Their communications weren't just through email, they extensively used the company's internal chat system, a platform I'd only ever seen him use for project updates or quick questions. Their chat logs went back years, concurrent with the other affairs but intensifying around the time of the reported meeting. They started innocently enough, discussing work, but quickly descended into personal conversations, then flirtation, and finally explicit messages. He hadn't just sexted her, he had engaged in a full-blown emotional and sexual affair online, using his work platform under my nose. They exchanged highly suggestive photos and videos, not just of themselves, but often of their surroundings, trying to guess where the other was, creating a twisted game of intimacy. He called her his secret, his escape. He talked about our life in veiled terms, expressing his dissatisfaction, painting a picture of a wife who didn't understand him, who had changed since motherhood. This wasn't just a moment of weakness, it was a sustained, deliberate campaign of betrayal, woven into the fabric of his daily life. The meeting at her other job, he had downplayed it, made it sound like a chance encounter. But the chat logs showed a carefully orchestrated plan. He had volunteered for a task that took him near her other workplace, specifically to see her. They didn't just talk for hours, they had a long, intimate lunch filled with stolen glances and whispered confessions, followed by a walk that culminated in that infamous hug and his hand on her. The details he had confessed were merely the tip of a very dirty iceberg. He hadn't just grabbed her ass, he had caressed her, held her close, lingered, then followed up with explicit texts about how much he wanted her, how he wished he could have done more. The images flooded my mind, sickeningly vivid. I saw his smile, his touch, his whispered words, all directed at someone else. My rage wasn't a simmering pot anymore, it was a roaring inferno, incinerating any lingering shred of love or hope I had held for him. The counseling sessions, his tearful apologies, his pleas for forgiveness, they all replayed in my mind, transformed into a grotesque mockery. He hadn't been remorseful, he had been protecting himself, doling out just enough truth to alleviate his guilt without revealing the true depth of his depravity. He wanted to keep his comfortable life, his family, his reputation, while I was left to grapple with the ruins. I spent hours poring over the evidence, downloading screenshots, creating a meticulous timeline. It was like dismantling a bomb, each wire I cut revealing another layer of explosive material. The sheer volume of his deceit, the calculating nature of his lies, was staggering. He wasn't a man who made a mistake, he was a man who lived a double life, a master of manipulation. He had compartmentalized his existence so thoroughly that I, his wife, the mother of his children, had been completely blind. As the afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a profound shift occurred within me. The pain was still there, a dull throb in my chest, but it was no longer consuming me. It was hardening, sharpening into something cold and resolute. The tears had stopped flowing. In their place was a clarity, a terrifying, beautiful clarity. I wasn't going to beg him for answers, I wasn't going to try to make it work. He had shown me who he truly was, and I refused to be a victim in his story any longer. The idea of leaving him, which had once felt like falling into a black hole, now felt like stepping into the light. But it wouldn't be a quiet departure, a dignified retreat. He had taken so much from me, my trust, my peace, my innocence about our life together. He had desecrated our marriage, our family, and my very sense of self, and he thought he could get away with it, or at least escape with minimal consequences. He thought he could confess a carefully edited version of the truth, seek forgiveness, and then continue living his comfortable life. He was wrong. A plan, nebulous at first, began to form in the recesses of my mind, a chilling whisper of retribution. I looked at the evidence I had collected, the damning proof of his betrayal, and a fierce, almost primal instinct ignited within me. He had used his intelligence, his charm, his position to deceive me. Well, I had my own strengths. I was the one who managed our finances, who knew his routines, who had access to his world. I was the one who had seen him at his most vulnerable, and now I saw him for the monster he was. I closed the laptop, my movements deliberate. The house was still quiet, the kids still at daycare. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for my next move. When David came home that evening, I was outwardly calm. I smiled, I made dinner, I asked about his day. The deception felt like a heavy cloak, but I wore it with a chilling new ease. He mistook my silence for contemplation, my distant gaze for hurt. He thought he was winning me back, one careful gesture at a time. He couldn't have been more wrong. The war had just begun, and he didn't even know he was on the battlefield. I wasn't just Sophia, the heartbroken wife, anymore. I was Sophia, the woman scorned, and I was coming for him. The first step was to secure my future and the children's. I needed to understand our financial standing, every asset, every shared account. I had been involved, but not intimately aware of all the details. Now I needed to be an expert. This wasn't about revenge in the heat of the moment. This was a calculated, deliberate dismantling. He had built his betrayal brick by brick, and I would tear down his world piece by painful piece. The war had indeed begun, and David, with his placating smiles and feigned remorse, remained blissfully unaware. He saw my silence as a sign of my brokenness, a woman retreating into herself, mourning the loss of a life she couldn't salvage. He couldn't have been more wrong. My silence was a shield, a camouflage for the storm brewing within me, a calculated detachment that allowed me to observe, plan, and execute. My first target was our finances. David had always handled the lion's share of the investments, the larger accounts, while I managed the household budget, the day-to-day expenses, a system that had seemed fair and practical at the time. Now it felt like a deliberate power imbalance. I needed to know everything, every cent, every asset, every liability. This wasn't about greed, it was about self-preservation, about securing a future for my children and myself that he would not control. I started with our joint bank accounts. Accessing them was easy enough. I knew all the passwords, had the debit cards, had always been a signatory. I spent hours poring over statements, transaction histories, scrutinizing every transfer, every withdrawal, every deposit. It was tedious work, a dry numerical counterpoint to the emotional inferno that still raged within me, but I found a strange, almost meditative focus in it. The numbers were concrete, undeniable, unlike David's slippery words. What I found wasn't outright theft or hidden stashes of cash, not yet anyway, but a pattern of subtle financial control. David had been slowly, almost imperceptibly, shifting larger sums into investments solely in his name or into accounts that required his primary authorization. Our joint savings, while still substantial, had seen fewer and smaller contributions compared to what I now realized he was diverting into his own private portfolio. He was hedging his bets, preparing for a future where I might not be a factor, or where he would have the upper hand. The realization sent a fresh wave of cold fury through me. He wasn't just a cheater, he was a calculating strategist, slowly building his own escape raft while I was still diligently patching holes in our shared ship. Next, I turned my attention to his work. As a construction project manager, he received quarterly bonuses, substantial ones that often went into our joint accounts or towards larger household expenses. But a quick cross-reference with his payroll statements, which I found hidden in an old tax file, revealed a discrepancy. He was receiving higher bonuses than what was being deposited into our shared accounts. The difference wasn't astronomical, but it added up month after month, year after year, accumulating into a significant sum. He had been skimming, siphoning off a portion of his earnings, probably to fund his illicit online activities or simply to build his secret nest egg. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He had painted me as the preoccupied wife, the one who had changed, while he was systematically robbing us blind. I began to build a meticulous spreadsheet, a cold, hard document of his financial transgressions. Each secret transfer, each underreported bonus, each investment made solely in his name was logged, dated, and cross-referenced with supporting documents I meticulously copied or photographed. I knew enough about his company's policies to understand that misrepresenting income or diverting funds, especially those intended for family support, could have serious repercussions. This wasn't just about divorce anymore, it was about justice, about exposing the full extent of his betrayal. My next step was securing legal counsel. I couldn't risk going into this blind. I needed an expert, someone who specialized in high-asset divorces, someone who understood the complexities of financial fraud and emotional distress. I researched lawyers discreetly, late at night after David was asleep, using a burner phone I purchased with cash and a secure browser on a public library computer. I left no digital trace in our home. I wanted to choose carefully, find someone with a reputation for being ruthless, for leaving no stone unturned. I needed a shark and I was prepared to pay for it. I found her, Brenda Hayes, a formidable attorney known in Orlando as the Iron Lady. Her online reviews spoke of her tenacity, her unwavering dedication to her clients, and her ability to navigate even the most contentious divorce battles. Her consultation fees were steep, but I knew instinctually that she was worth every penny. I booked a discreet meeting under a false pretext, a consultation about estate planning, just in case David ever stumbled upon the appointment in my calendar or emails. The day of the meeting, I dressed carefully, a professional facade to match the steely resolve growing within me. I left the children with David, telling him I had a doctor's appointment. He barely registered it, too absorbed in his own world, his own carefully constructed narrative of a healing marriage. His dismissiveness, once hurtful, now fueled my anger, hardening my resolve. He would regret underestimating me. Brenda Hayes' office was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the cozy, lived-in feel of our home. She was every bit the Iron Lady her reputation suggested: sharp, intelligent eyes, a no-nonsense demeanor, and a voice that commanded attention. I laid out my case, the carefully curated evidence of David's affairs, his financial maneuvering, the full, ugly truth that had shattered my world. I spoke calmly, factually, my voice devoid of emotion, a practiced composure that surprised even myself. I showed her the screenshots of the emails, the chat logs, the financial discrepancies I had painstakingly documented. Brenda listened intently, her expression unreadable. She occasionally jotted notes, her pen scratching against a legal pad. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. She leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Sophia," she began, her voice calm and measured, "what you have here is not just grounds for divorce. It's a compelling case for marital misconduct, emotional distress, and potential financial fraud. This could significantly impact the division of assets, child custody, and even spousal support." A flicker of triumph, cold and satisfying, ignited within me. This was it. This was the validation I needed, the confirmation that my intuition, my anger, my meticulous detective work had all been justified. "I want everything," I told her, my voice firm. "Not just for me, but for my children. He cannot be allowed to walk away from this unscathed, to simply start over while I'm left to pick up the pieces of a life he so carelessly destroyed. I want him to feel the full weight of what he's done." Brenda nodded slowly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "I understand completely, Sophia, and I believe we can achieve that, but it will be a fight. He won't go down without one, especially with the evidence you've uncovered." We discussed strategy. Brenda advised me to continue gathering evidence, to document everything, but to be careful not to raise David's suspicions. We talked about how to approach the divorce filing, whether to blindside him or to attempt mediation, though Brenda agreed that given the depth of his deceit, mediation was unlikely to be productive. She stressed the importance of protecting the children, of ensuring their stability throughout the inevitable upheaval. The conversation with Brenda was invigorating, a surge of adrenaline replacing the exhaustion that had plagued me for weeks. I felt empowered, no longer a victim, but an active participant in my own destiny. I had a plan, a formidable ally, and a renewed sense of purpose. Returning home, the familiar walls of our house felt different. They were no longer a prison of deceit, but a staging ground for my retribution. David was watching TV, Lily playing with blocks at his feet, Leo asleep in his crib. He looked up when I walked in, offering a weak smile. "How was the doctor, honey?" he asked, his eyes already drifting back to the screen. I smiled back, a genuine, albeit chilling, smile. "Fine, David, everything's fine." He bought it. He had no idea the storm that was gathering, the tectonic shifts occurring beneath his feet. He saw a tired wife, perhaps a little withdrawn, but slowly coming around. He saw the mother of his children, the woman he believed he could manipulate back into submission. He saw what he wanted to see, and that, I realized, was his greatest weakness. I continued my subtle reconnaissance. I paid closer attention to his phone calls, the hushed tones when he spoke to certain contacts. I learned his new routines, his after-work activities, the subtle shifts in his behavior that, to my now sharpened senses, screamed of continued deception or, at the very least, a lack of genuine change. He was still the same man, just a little more careful, a little more practiced in his lies. I needed to secure my financial independence quickly and discreetly. With Brenda's guidance, I opened a new bank account in my name only, at a different bank, several miles away from our usual branch. I started diverting small amounts of my personal income, money from my freelance writing work, into this new account. It wasn't enough to raise any red flags with David, but it was a crucial first step in building my own financial safety net. I also looked into applying for my own credit cards, something I hadn't done in years, having relied on our joint accounts. It was a slow process, but I was methodical, patient. The prospect of confronting David, of unleashing the full force of my evidence, grew closer with each passing day. Brenda advised timing was crucial. We needed to strike when he was most vulnerable, when his legal options were limited, and when our case was airtight. The goal wasn't just a divorce, it was a complete and utter dismantling of his carefully constructed world. My revenge wouldn't be a sudden, explosive outburst. It would be a slow burn, a calculated deconstruction, piece by painful piece until he was left with nothing but the ashes of his own deceit. He had taken my trust, my peace, my belief in our shared future. Now I would take his. And the children, our precious Lily and Leo, would be my North Star, the reason for every strategic move, every ruthless decision. Their future, their security would be paramount. David's future, however, was about to become very, very bleak. The next stage was to execute the strategy, to spring the trap. The quiet before the storm was about to break. I was ready. The Iron Lady and I were a team, and David was about to face a reckoning he never saw coming. I pictured his face when he finally understood the depth of my knowledge, the meticulousness of my preparation, the absolute, unwavering resolve of the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. That image, dark and satisfying, was enough to keep me going. He wouldn't just lose a wife, he would lose his entire life. And I would be the architect of his downfall. The air in the house grew thick with unspoken tension in the days leading up to the inevitable. David, still oblivious, continued his charade of a devoted husband, occasionally making small, placating gestures that now only served to fuel my contempt. He thought he was slowly reeling me back in, that my quiet demeanor was a sign of a broken spirit he could easily mend. How little he knew. My focus was absolute, my resolve unwavering. I continued to gather every scrap of information, every financial detail, every subtle shift in his behavior that could serve as another nail in his coffin. Brenda, my formidable Iron Lady, had put the final touches on our legal strategy. We decided to strike on a Friday afternoon, right after he returned from work. It was a calculated move designed to give him an entire weekend to stew in the wreckage of his shattered life, with no immediate escape to the false comfort of his office or his carefully constructed lies. The day arrived with a muggy, oppressive heat, typical of Orlando in summer. My heart hammered a frantic drum against my ribs, but it was not fear, it was anticipation. Lily and Leo were at daycare, their innocent laughter a distant echo in the quiet house. I had meticulously cleaned the house as if preparing for an important guest, not a confrontation that would tear my world apart and his. When I heard his car pull into the driveway, a sudden surge of adrenaline coursed through me. This was it, the moment of reckoning. He walked in, loosening his tie, a tired but familiar smile on his face. "Rough day, honey, what's for dinner?" His casual tone was a stark reminder of the life he still believed he had, the life I was about to snatch away. I met his gaze, holding it steady, my own face a mask of calm. "We need to talk, David, now." He sensed the shift, the unusual gravity in my voice. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of concern, then defensiveness. "What's wrong, Sophia? Is everything okay with the kids?" He was still trying to deflect, to control the narrative. I walked over to the dining table where I had placed a thick envelope, Brenda's handiwork. He followed, his brow furrowed, a growing unease in his eyes. I picked up the envelope and handed it to him. His fingers brushed mine, and I felt nothing but a chilling detachment. "What's this?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly as he saw the legal firm's logo. He opened it, pulling out the official documents, petition for dissolution of marriage. His eyes scanned the words, his face draining of color, a look of utter shock replacing his earlier bewilderment. "Divorce," he whispered, the word barely audible. "Sophia, what is this? I thought we were working on this. Counseling." "Counseling was for you, David," I stated, my voice clear and steady. "A chance for you to confess the whole truth, a chance for you to take responsibility, but you didn't. You only offered a carefully edited version, didn't you? Just enough to ease your conscience, but not enough to truly face the consequences." He stammered, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "I don't understand. I told you everything. I made a mistake, a stupid mistake, and I'm so sorry." I reached into my bag, pulling out a USB drive. "You didn't just make a mistake, David. You built a network of lies for 4 years. While I was raising our children, building our life, loving you with every fiber of my being, you were living a double life. You were having emotional and sexual affairs, not just sexting. You were telling other women I was distant, preoccupied, painting me as the villain to justify your depravity." I slid the USB drive across the table, its small, innocuous form holding the power to ruin him. "Everything, it's all in there. The emails with Sarah, the what-ifs with Jessica, the meticulously planned chance encounters with Emily, the explicit chat logs, the photos, the videos, the financial discrepancies too, every single lie, every betrayal, every cent you siphon off for your secret life." His eyes darted from the USB drive to my face, a desperate plea for me to be lying, to be mistaken. But my unwavering gaze, the cold resolve in my eyes, told him it was all true. The color completely drained from his face, leaving it ashen. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The shock had rendered him speechless, finally truly speechless. "You don't get to walk away from this, David, with just a slap on the wrist," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "You don't get to keep your comfortable life, your reputation, your carefully crafted image, while I'm left to pick up the pieces. I have a lawyer, Brenda Hayes, the Iron Lady they call her. She has all of this. And she's going to ensure you feel the full weight of what you've done." He finally found his voice, a choked, desperate whisper. You went through my things, my work computer, Sophia, that's illegal." A harsh, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Illegal. What about your years of deceit, David? What about the emotional abuse, the marital fraud, the financial skimming from our joint accounts? You think your privacy matters more than my entire shattered world. You wanted to make yourself the victim to ease your conscience. Now you get to live with the consequences of your choices, every single one. The ensuing weeks were a blur of legal maneuvering, discovery, and David's increasingly desperate attempts to salvage his reputation. He hired his own lawyer, a man who, I suspected, quickly realized the futility of his client's position once Brenda presented our meticulously documented evidence. The screenshots, the chat logs, the financial records, it was undeniable. The evidence of marital misconduct and financial deceit was overwhelming. His company, once alerted to the extent of his use of their internal systems for illicit activities and the financial improprieties, launched their own internal investigation. The professional repercussions were swift and brutal. David was suspended, then quietly let go, his career trajectory derailed, his reputation in the Orlando construction community in tatters. The man who had been so proud of his work, his achievements, now had nothing. The divorce proceedings, while contentious, ultimately favored me. Brenda, true to her reputation, was relentless. The judge, presented with the overwhelming evidence of his repeated infidelities and financial misdeeds, awarded me the marital home, a significant portion of our assets, and substantial child and spousal support. David was left with little more than his diminished savings and the shame of his public exposure. His comfortable life, his family, his carefully constructed world, all were systematically dismantled, just as I had planned. The day the divorce was finalized, I stood on the porch of our house, the house that was now truly mine, and watched the Orlando sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was a sunset of endings, but also of new beginnings. The pain was still a raw ache in my heart, a scar that would forever remind me of the man I once loved and the betrayal I endured, but it was no longer consuming. In its place was a quiet strength, a fierce determination to build a new life for my children and myself. Lily and Leah were asleep inside, their gentle breathing a comforting rhythm in the quiet house. They were the reason I had fought so hard, the reason I had emerged from the ashes of my broken marriage. They would grow up in a home free from deceit, with a mother who, though wounded, was strong, resilient, and fiercely protective. David was gone. His presence, once so pervasive, had faded to a ghost. He tried to maintain a relationship with the children as stipulated by the court, but his visits were infrequent, strained. He was a shell of the man he once was, stripped of his bravado, his charm, his carefully constructed lies. He had lost everything he had taken for granted, everything he had betrayed. My revenge was complete. It wasn't a scream in the dark or a moment of dramatic confrontation. It was a slow, calculated unraveling, a meticulous dismantling of his world piece by painful piece. He had wanted to be free from the routine of our life, from the responsibilities he felt trapped by. Now he had an abundance of freedom, a solitary existence, haunted by the consequences of his own choices. He was alone, utterly and completely, just as I had felt for those 4 years of his deception. The poetic justice was undeniable. He had built his betrayal brick by brick, and I, Sophia Walker, the woman he had so foolishly underestimated, had torn down his world, leaving him with nothing but the dust of his own deceit. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, profoundly free. My new life, though still uncertain, was mine to shape, unburdened by his lies. The path ahead was daunting, but I would walk it, head held high, a survivor, a protector, and ultimately, a woman reborn. The future was unwritten, but it was mine, and that was all that mattered.